Hello, thank you all for being here. I think we have a short movie clip that's going to be running just to help introduce you more to Eddy so that you know more about his story. But until that runs, so Eddy has this slogan, and this is we're going to be talking about how this sort of system, this approach to life was developed. And the slogan is, "You must be willing to engage in a personal revolution before we embark on a collective revolution." And so that's what we'll be exploring today with Eddy.
At the age of 16, I committed a crime of home invasion robbery. I was the youngest prisoner in San Quentin's maximum security prison. I ended up spending 19 years inside the prison system. I was in the hole for 11 months for signing a proposal for ethnic studies and Asian American studies. The only human contact would be when the guards put their handcuffs on us. How do you be in the prison system and be free mentally? The victory for you have is get that mental freedom, and then it's going to lead you to physical freedom for life. There are always going to be struggles. The day that there's no more struggle is the day that I'm not breathing.
Thank you again for all for being here. I wanted to start out this conversation, and we really want to just be able to explore Eddy's life experiences and how he came to make such a inspirational transformation. So we'll start from more from the beginning. So Eddy is an immigrant. He and his family came over when he was a young teenager. And a lot of times, coming to the United States is understood. It's kind of celebrated as being a land of opportunity for Chinese. It's thought of as the Gold Mountain. But this actually wasn't the case for your family. It was actually more sort of an experience of downward mobility. So I was wondering if you could talk about that for.
Yeah, thank you, Madeline, for helping this conversation right here. Happy New Breath, everyone. I just want to invite all of you to just take in a deep breath, right? Because we are always holding a lot, and sometimes we take that breath that is sustaining our lives for granted, right? And so it's always good for me when I take a deep breath and just to feel that I'm alive. Right? So let's take a deep breath together. Again, my name is Eddy Zheng, and I'm grateful for South by Southwest for inviting me to share this space. I just feel very fortunate because someone who has a background like myself is able to share this type of stages, right, in Austin, Texas. And so for me, I always talking about how do we own our own story and our own narrative. As someone who grew up in Guangzhou, China, up to the age of 12, when we migrated to the United States, I settled in Oakland, California with my family of 5. I have an older sister, Lily, who's actually here with me, and I have an older brother, and then my parents. And we came to settle in Oakland, California because my grandparents, who visited China for the first time after a few decades that they have been in the United States, they felt that it's important for the children to have a better career and educational opportunity. So as a teenager, I definitely didn't have a decision-making power at the time to whether I want to come to the United States or not. So I came hoping for this idea of getting a better life and a better opportunity. Unfortunately, what I immediately had encountered was the language barrier, cultural differences, and generation gap. And from that aspect, for me, that I had never anticipated, there was so much of a difference, right, in the way I grew up and how I migrated to the United States. And it was very difficult for me to just assimilate as an immigrant. And I think what society and what people really failed to understand for many of the immigrants and also refugee populations, that's this impact of ACEs, right? So many people talk about ACEs, which is adverse childhood experiences, and how the impact for people that were dealing with violence, grew up in dysfunctional homes. For myself, I felt that I was kind of impacted by ACEs at that early age. So when I couldn't fit in, I definitely did not have the ability to be able to understand how those trauma impacted the rest of my life. And when I entered the school system with Madeline as an immigrant in junior high school, it was very challenging because I didn't understand what the teacher was talking about, right? So in that journey, I felt that I did not belong, in the school system, who did not offer me culturally competent resources to help me adjust to a new culture and new educational system. And so from that standpoint, it's very easy for me to fall into the wrong crowd because when I was in China growing up, I had a pretty structured family and routine. But when I came to the US, because of my parents having to work and then not being home, and then I became a latchkey kid, right? Pretty much I was on my own. And trying to navigate that system was very challenging in that space. So definitely the idea of this American dream, the Golden Mountain that you have mentioned, for many immigrants who came here, for me, it's a dream deferred, right? Just like, it's kind of like a representation of Langston Hughes' poem, A Dream Deferred. I can resonate with that.
So even though clearly you're smart, clearly you have drive and ambition.
Is that a model minority
No, but clearly
statement there?
You did not have the model minority kind of outcomes.
That's true. I was just kidding, Madeline. So that's what is assumed of us, right? It's like, oh, you're Asian, you must be smart and you're good at math, and all the different stereotypes that really disempower many challenges, right, in my life and in our communities in many ways. So it was very difficult even to be accepted, right, by, that's why there's a difference, the people who are American born versus the people who came to the United States, because that's just, there's a class divide, right? There's a gender divide. There's also this racial divide, right, in this process. But of course, at the time, I had no idea what all that meant. I was just a kid who left a place that I grew up and I was familiar with, and then all the connection I had over there in China, it was gone, right? So I had to kind of develop those type of relationships and find my place of belonging. And unfortunately, that place was a lot of juvenile delinquency, and then connecting with other immigrants who also did not fit in. And then we kind of trying to find belonging with each other, and then it led to things that we didn't want to happen.
So I don't know how much you want to talk about this, but you ended up being arrested for a crime, and it was bad enough that your parents thought that actually going to prison for a bit would help you to reset. But then they were wrong, because as is very visible in this in the documentary Breathe In, but in many other accounts that we can readily access about the prison system. A lot of times the prison system just sort of, what happened to you? It seems like they just sort of threw you in prison as a teenager, and then it was like throwing your life into the trash can.
Well, unfortunately at the time, we had no idea about the criminal legal system. And so from that perspective, it's always, as whether it's my parents or people in my family and in our community, in the Asian American community, it's more so of, if you have done wrong, then you should admit it and take responsibility for it, and hopefully that you'll be able to change your life and become a better person. But the penal system in the United States of America is different, right? It's different. That's why we have the United States of America as the #1 in incarceration, right? Internationally, right? We locked up over 2 million people in our country, and so as someone who just kind of fell out of this assimilation process as a good immigrant, unfortunately, out of this, having low self-esteem and low self-confidence and being very easily influenced in this space, materialistic things became a priority, right? And so I committed a crime of home invasion robbery with a couple of co-defendants, and then it turned into a kidnap to commit robbery. And I was arrested and charged as an adult at the age of 16 and sentenced to life in prison with a possibility of parole. And so when I entered the prison system, it was definitely, as someone that I just been to the United States for like 3.5 years, right? And when I reflect on that, it's kind of, challenging for me to even comprehend that what life with a possibility means, right? It's a possibility for freedom, or it's a possibility that I would die in prison, right? And so from that perspective, my parents did not understand that, I didn't understand that. So for me, it's about survival. So when I inflicted harm on this family in San Francisco, I had no respect, right, for their suffering and their feelings, because I had no respect for myself. And I didn't see there's a future for myself in that standpoint. And so I didn't have any remorse at the time when I committed that crime. All I wanted was money, right? I wanted to get money, right? And so not understanding the ripple effect of that trauma can happen for not only for my direct victims, but then also for my family, for myself, and for my community. And so, I think that's where, when I was in the prison system, at the very earlier stages, is when people ask me, "Oh, are you sorry for what you've done?" And my immediate response, as expected by everyone, is like, "Yes, I am sorry." But I did not really understood at the time or comprehend the seriousness of my crime and how the impact it created on the direct victims. So it's all about learning how to survive at the time. But I think as I'm engaging in this journey of survival, then I realized that for Asian American Pacific Islander populations who are incarcerated, we are segregated as others, right? So it doesn't matter where we came from, what nationality we are. If we don't fit in the category of Black, white, or Hispanic, then we all just lump into as others. And as others, even though we have a small representation in the prison industry complex, however, I think, we have a steady increase, right, within the AAPI community in the prison system. But of course, the overrepresentation of the Black and brown indigenous community overshadows any other smaller minorities who are impacted by the prison system.
So how did you have this sort of attachment to the idea of developing a sense of culture, history, and identity. So C-H-I. So how did you come to, so you're sort of stuck in this place, very, very deep hole, not just a personal hole, but also an institutional hole. How did you come to sort of value understanding more of your culture, history, and identity, and what were the steps you took to try to bring yourself out of this place, personally?
Yeah, so at the time, after I learned how to survive and navigate the prison system, I understood very intimately how important education is, right? So when as a kid growing up, my parents always emphasized the importance of education. When I came to the United States, my grandparents emphasized that point, my parents emphasized that point. But for me, I was not connected to that and trying to understand how important education is, right? So once I was learn how to survive in prison, and I realized if I even need to get a better job, right? I was getting paid 19 cents an hour at the time. And then, so I say, well, I need to learn English. I need to get some skills. So as I am getting ready to learn English, do word power, do Chinese English dictionaries, and do the support of some of my peers inside, I was able to get my GED. And as soon as I got that, I immediately got a better job, right? That paid, 23 cents an hour. And then later on, I learned how to type in a regular typewriter, and then I got a clerical job. So then I got 35 cents an hour, right? And so I see even those small steps was able to allow me the opportunity to survive in that space. But I think ultimately, through the educational process, I really was able to engage on this idea of figuring out how do I hold myself accountable for the harm that I inflicted, right? So when I first started, it's like, hey, I'm sorry because I did this. Not really, right? Because I'm sorry at the time was because I got caught, right? But then now that when I learned how to read and write English and really start engage this idea of a critical thinking education, then I was able to reflect on the fact that I did not want any thing that I had done to those direct victims to happen to my family member or to anyone or my friends or my community. So why did I do that to them, right? And so from that standpoint, I learned how to forgive myself in a sense that I need to understand why I committed the harm and I need to move on, but not really forgetting what I've done, but really trying to emphasize the point that I need to make changes in my life and to make amends. And part of making amends is how do I give myself tools, right, to can contribute, whether when I was incarcerated or later on when I get my freedom. And so in that process, I really immersed myself into educating myself through the support of many of the volunteers. And I was very fortunate, right, because I was located in San Quentin State Prison, which is located in the Bay Area where a lot of, affluent folks, progressive folks in the community. So they all went inside the prison to volunteer to support many of the prisoners inside. And through that process, I was able to engage many of the scholars like yourself and professors, undergrad students. And when I met with them, they really inspired me because I realized that, man, these people are smart, right? And I can't even carry a conversation with them. And so I remember going to ask one of my colleagues who's also working with me and serving a life sentence, but who already had a PhD before he was incarcerated out of New York, right? And I said, how do I become well-read? So because we worked in the library and he just went to the classic section, this bookshelf, and he said, you start from this aisle and read all the way from the next aisle, you'll be well-read. And so I started reading. I remember, reading a lot of Shakespeare, Plato, and any of the philosophers that I need to be reading to improve myself. I started doing that. But one thing that I realized that there was no Asian American literatures and culture and history that I have access to learn. So I was learning about everybody else's culture and history, but yet nobody's learning about my culture and history. So after 9/11 happened, really, there's a lot, even within the prison system, there's a lot of scapegoating towards Asian Americans, right, or people who are from, the Middle East, right, about, calling them the terrorists, calling them the one who are inflicting harm in this country. So I realized, even though I was participating in a program inside San Quentin, but they are not really offering the opportunity for people to learn about each other's culture and history, right? Who informs our identity. That's why through that process, I was able to really advocate, right, for the Asian American studies and ethnic studies and advocating for prisoners' rights. But unfortunately, the administration just took us into solitary confinement, put us under investigation, and I ended up spending 11 months in solitary confinement because I signed that proposal, right, in advocating the opportunity for us to tap into our chi. And the chi that I want to emphasize is not just the breath that's sustaining our lives, but the chi that I'm talking about is also culture, history, and identity. Because when I was able to learn about other people's culture and history and my own culture and history, immediately, without any other kind of a commonality, is that we are able to humanize each other, right? And from that standpoint, for me, it's that I was able to tap into my chi that led me to this eventual mental freedom and spirituality, and then also the emotional, tapping into that emotional aspect of it. I think we talked about it a little bit earlier. Let's talk about how that personal enlightenment can help individuals and community to reach a point that we can find that mental freedom that we are human beings, and that we need to humanize each other.
So this was your personal revolution. And then as you were trying to pursue something of a collective revolution, if we think about trying to get the San Quentin to offer ethnic studies, for which you went to solitary confinement. So I've just been thinking about this because this is very current in that there are a lot of attacks on efforts to ban the teaching of ethnic studies in many, many states, including the state of Texas. But so you have been able to to accomplish your personal revolution, which was part of, I think, what brought a lot of people to rally around you and help you attain your physical liberty. So there's sort of a personal assumption of responsibility and just sort of seeing that how your life is interconnected with that of your community, with the family that you attacked. And then you were able to accomplish literal liberation. And then you have sought to further realize just the collective revolution. Can you talk about some of the ways in which you've pursued that? Because this is how Eddy has made an impact, I think.
Well, I want to share this, Madeline, that I have mad respect for you and what you do as a scholar, right? As a professor, as an educator, in really focusing on how do you teach people the importance of history? How do we have different neutral spaces that we can engage in a conversation? We're talking about Asian American studies, ethnic studies, and women's studies and global studies. And this is all being led by many of your colleagues in 1968 in San Francisco State with the Third World Liberation Front, right? With Harvey Dong, many of the elders who really sacrificed themselves to create this opportunity to saying that we need to educate ourselves, right, in the institutional education to be more inclusive. So when you're talking about, now I don't want to rub people wrong in a different way. When we talk about a critical race theory, there's so many misconceptions about that, right? So, but I don't want to get into that point right now. But when I look at critical race theory, understanding but tapping into the chi, it's really about a commitment to social justice, right? How do we commit to ourselves to make sure that that's equity, that we are treated equally, right, in that space? So back to that personal revolution that leads to collective revolution is that we may have different lived experience, different ideas about what equity means and what equality means based on race, gender, sexuality, and class. But then if we don't have that ability to reflect and internalize and be very vulnerable with ourselves, right? Then how are we going to be able to try to understand other people's vulnerabilities and other people's challenges and lived experience, and validating that, right? So that's very important. But I think the other thing that I want to address, as you brought that up, was that, it's one thing the prison system is about punishment, it's about continue to perpetuate trauma, right? With the idea that hopefully some people, when they come out of prison, will be a better person. But you don't provide anything as a system to the rehabilitation efforts. And that's why even when I was in there, when I was able to find that connection, I always wanted to engage my direct victim and apologize to them, right? So, because I understood that, man, that's something that they're gonna have to live with for the rest of their lives, just like I have to live with that for the rest of my life. And so when I reach out to my direct victims when I was incarcerated, of course, the district attorney's office, they all discouraged that the direct interaction. So I went to a faith-based community, a leader from the community, trying to interact with them. And then, they say, hey, let's let bygones to be bygones. Let's not reopen the wounds. So that's one aspect of it. I think the other aspect of about the prison industry complex that we fail to realize too is that when we look at the Asian American, Natiive Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander community, and its detrimental impact is getting from this incarceration, we have to connect that to the U.S. foreign policies, right? How that the U.S. is using, I just want to bring the Southeast Asian countries as an example, right? To highlight the fact that our country, we use that area to conduct a proxy war. And how many times have we seen that happen in our country's history, that we are using other people's countries, other people's land as a battleground? And so specifically for Southeast Asians is that once the war ended, the war refugees came to the United States. When they came to the United States, they did not get resettled in affluent areas with culturally competent therapeutic support to address the trauma of war, where people were born in refugee camps and then coming to the United States. They are settled in many of the low-income, poverty, and violence-stricken areas, side by side with many other people of color communities. So, but the penal system highlights the fact that once you serve your time, you should be able to go back out and restart your life or re-enter society. Well, that is true for US citizens. And so for anyone who's not US citizen, that's a different policy. So I'll just bring up.
You?
Yeah, that's exactly what happened to me, right? So I served 19 years in the state prison system, and finally the governor decided that I'm no longer a threat to society, and so I was released. On the day that I released from the state prison system, the ICE, under Department of Homeland Security, ICE meaning the Immigrant Customs Enforcement, came to the state prison and picked me up for detention and deportation in the federal custody. And so I ended up spending, 2 years, right, in ICE custody fighting against my deportation, and I still lost my case.
Because so, you were a legal immigrant, but you just hadn't taken the step of becoming a citizen. And so once you had the criminal record, then it made you liable for deportation. So it was like you were being punished all over again because of your immigration status. Correct.
So I think one of the policy that I want to uplift is really that was passed in 1996, right? If many of you, I don't know if you remember the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing by Timothy McVeigh, right? From that bombing, it really for the U.S. to tighten its immigration policies, right? And the reason you want to tighten it because when the incident happened, the government thought it was some terrorists from the Middle East or elsewhere who committed that crime, but yet it was a domestic terrorism, right? And so there's this one law that passed in 1996. It's the illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act of 1996. That who party states that anyone who is not a citizen of the United States, who have committed a crime of moral turpitude or crime of aggravated felony, that they are automatically detained and deported, and the law is retroactive. So therefore, it impacts many of the Southeast Asian refugees and other refugees and immigrants who came to the country who have brushes with the law, whether how serious or not serious the incident may be. So I think from that end, we can see that the Cambodian refugees are continue to be deported today, right? We're talking about today, not before years ago, but we're talking about consistently being targeted for deportation and separation of their family. And so I think that's part of this, something that people really don't make that connection. So we talk a lot about the school to prison pipeline, but what I'm trying to uplift here too, and that's also the school to prison and deportation pipeline that impacts the people.
And so that's one of the ways in which immigration, so still a majority of the Asian American population in the United States is foreign born or immigrant. It's at about 70%, but there's actually a long history of so the racialization of Asian Americans, and I think you can tell that one of the things we've had conversations about is the ways in which the perception of Asian Americans as a model minority really masks the reality that there's a tremendous diversity. There's so there's sort of a very visible group that are highly successful, but there's also a persistent class who come in as refugees, as sort of working class, who are also very vulnerable because of their immigrant status, but then also because of the racialization as foreigners and also as threats, which has been as we've been experiencing, particularly heightened in the past 2 years because of the COVID pandemic and blaming of East Asian appearing people. And we are actually just a couple days past the anniversary of the shootings of 6 Asian American women in Atlanta. And so this is all, just it's embedded in certain laws and institutions, but it's also embedded in people's perceptions and then also actions. And so some of what you undertake in terms of your social justice work, and this is something that we all try to advance in one way or another. I'm mostly in the classroom and I write and publish books, which most of you will never read, but is this idea of pursuing social justice. But it's really, and this is, I think, something that you strongly try to campaign for. It's not just social justice for yourself, right? It has to be social justice for everybody. So I'm wondering if you could talk about these aspects of your advocacy and your community organizing.
Yeah, how much time do we have?
We have.
We can talk about that all day. I was just kidding. But Madeline, I feel that that's why the historical aspect is so important, right? We're talking about touching that chi. Is that, as a scholar and a historian, I want to uplift the point that on May 6th, right, of this year, it would be the 180th anniversary of the Chinese Exclusion Act, right? We also just have experienced the 80th anniversary of the Executive Order 9066, where the Japanese internment, where over 120,000 Japanese Americans being put in concentration camps, right? And to a closer history, we talk about how it's 40th anniversary of the Vincent Chin case, where this Detroit Chinese American auto worker who was beaten to death, right? Because he was mistakenly for a Japanese American, but the people who had murdered him never received the punishment, just like any other, people of color who are supposed to be punished, but because of the color of their skin, that they escape those type of punishment. And you mentioned about the Atlanta shooting. Well, it's been as we approached that, a couple of weeks ago, this 67-year-old Chinese or Asian American woman in New York was being 125 times attacked, right, by this individual. And that's something that is ongoing, right? Historically, it has happened. It had never stopped, the violence against Asian Americans, right, and many other people or communities. But they're targeting the most vulnerable, right, like the elderly and the women. So when we talk about gender-based violence and how important it is for us to learn how to be able to address that and change policy around that, is so important, right? So when we talk about gender-based violence, I can't help but to bring up this. I call it definitely is a very dehumanizing and racist policy that Texas is enacting towards the transgender community, right? You can't in one breath say that we're progressive and then on the other breath that we're actually enacting those inhumane policies to the people, And that's why the importance of tapping into that chi, right? Because those people are not being humanized anymore. So how do we break that mold of thinking, right, in that sense? And so that's where the collective liberation is kind of like a goal, but then the personal revolution is the beginning.
So it's a matter of not just sort of valuing your own humanity, but also valuing the humanity of other people.
Well, that's why I was so grateful when I had the opportunity to apologize my direct victim. Right? Post-incarceration, I was able to, interact with my direct victim. I wrote an apology letter, my parents wrote an apology letter, and then also the community leadership wrote an apology letter to my direct victim. And, her embracing of me apologizing to her, it really demonstrates the true sense of humanity and compassion, right, from her perspective, right? Of course, there were other victims involved in my case that they may not have the ability at the time to be able to accept my apology or to be able to move forward, right, as part of their healing. And so that's something that I have to live with for the rest of my life, right? And so whatever I do, in uplifting some of this injustice that happened in our community, we have to tie into this idea of it's bigger than us, right? So when I look at all this violence that's happening, when we look at all this police killings of people of color, and when we look at the way how the Black Lives Matter movement has really came to the forefront into saying that we need to be able to organize everyone, not only the people who are directly impacted, but the people who, as long as we share space on this earth, the humankind, that we are all impacted in some way, right? And then without, one thing about, my case and many other cases with people who inflicted harm, we're always talking about individual accountability. But we don't often talk about systemic accountability. How do we hold the system who perpetuate those harm, do those type of policies accountable and change those type of bad practices, right? So we have to address systemic racism, and we have to address white supremacy, right? And we also have to address this patriarchal society that we live in, that we're perpetuating many of those harm on the women or gender non-conforming folks. I mean, I think that's where my activism and my contribution to pay it forward is about how do I use my lived experience as an expert and to be able to create alternative to incarceration, alternative to inflict harm, right, through restorative justice methods, to transformative justice opportunities, right, to at least introduce that there's more than one way to address personal and public safety.
So can you talk about the New Breath Foundation?
Oh,
so,
yeah.
So you turned your personal journey into efforts to sort of have a broader movement, have sort of an institution of your own that can try to help promote these transformations more broadly.
Yeah, no, that'd be great, thank you. Jen, maybe Jen can help me to put up the video very quickly. For someone who has been incarcerated for 21 years of my life, I know what it feels like to be counted out. I know what it feels like to have no hope. And I know what it's like when people never gave up on me. The New Breath Foundation is something unique in the institution of philanthropy. My goal is to utilize my lived experience to be able to build power within the marginalized community by providing them with the necessary resources, really help them to build infrastructure where they can thrive.
Without New Breath, we would not be here. We are doing mental health outreach for folks that have been deported to Cambodia. And New Breath Foundation gives us the funding to do this work, to help those most impacted by deportation and incarceration, the 1.5 generation that has not had enough support and resources.
New Breath Foundation has funded our work. AAPI Women Leads is an organization that amplifies the leadership of Asian and Pacific Islander women, girls, non-binary communities. We also work to end the violence against our communities, and we do this in solidarity with Black, Indigenous, and other communities of color.
We want to build partnerships. We want to be able to deepen our relationship and revolutionize the way that we distribute our resources and empowering our community so that we can all be in a better place together. And the reason why people should support New Breath Foundation is because we want to be able to contribute to address inequities, not only in the AAPI community, but knowing that our liberation are tied to other Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities. And it's through this type of investment of building racial solidarity that we will all be able to be free. Thank you. I started the New Breath Foundation because, I understood the inequity in the institution of philanthropy and its distribution, right? There's less than 0.2% of its philanthropic dollars nationally. Less than 0.2%, right? That goes to support Asian American, Natiive Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander communities. That's unacceptable. We talked about the modern minority myth a little bit earlier, but that has a big part to deal with that, right? And so I've been post-incarceration. I've been out for 15 years. I've been in the community for 15 years, and I work in nonprofit organizations. And it's very difficult to have disaggregated data to get funding to support the work, right? And so I say, one day when I get rich and famous, I want to start a foundation where I can just give money away, right? So, of course, I didn't get rich, but I'm rich in spirit and in my life. But I did become a little infamous. And so through that, I was able to really cultivate some supporters to help me to realize this idea of creating a New Breath Foundation. The New Breath Foundation is offering hope and healing, right, to people who are directly impacted by mass incarceration, deportation, and survivors of violence, right? And through that process, I want to create a seat at the table. And I also want to create access while I'm at the table, and I also want to be able to create my own table, right? So the three pillars of our focus really is hope and healing, keeping families together, and movement building. Because we understand the importance of racial solidarity, and we understand the importance of keeping families together. So we took a trip to Cambodia in 2019, and I just remember how this one individual who was deported, right, from Fresno, California, he was deported for 5 years for something he did, many years ago, and he left behind 3 children. And when our lawyer, right, Anup Prasad, who did an intake on him, he found out that he was actually a naturalized U.S. citizen. But because he didn't have the paperwork, or his family didn't know, and the government did not have his paperwork, they deported him. And so the lawyer was able to support him, and that he was able to reunite with his family 2 months later after we came back from Cambodia, right? But there's so many other people who may be in that situation, or they could do post-conviction relief to get them to reunite with their family out here. But have we not been able to go do a listening tour with the people who are directly impacted, we wouldn't have been able to support that, right? And so even though New Breath Foundation's only started in 2018 officially, we realized the growth of our organization, right? People like myself who has a criminal history and criminal background, we don't belong to a lot of different spaces, right? But yet because I was able to create a seat at the table, I was able to really try to mobilize resources from our philanthropic community, right? And so in 2018, we gave away $13,000, right? That was not in our plan. It's like, oh, we want to give more money. So we gave $13,000 to different organizations in 2018. And 2019, we gave away around $88,000. 2020, we gave away $100,000 to different organizations. And then, of course, the pandemic has really grounded us, and we couldn't do much of the external engagement. But yet, because all the violence that happened, with George Floyd, the killing of George Floyd, and many others, and then also all the anti-Asian violence that happened, that is being magnified in the media, national media. So last year, we were able to give away $2.3 million, right? Through this fund that we created called the We Got Us Fund. It's a $10 million pool fund that we put together. And the whole idea is how do we build power, capacity, infrastructure for the marginalized grassroots Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Island communities. Right? So that's what the New Breath Foundation has done so far. And I definitely want to reach that $10 million goal. So if you know anyone who has $20 million, $30 million, who's just like sitting around doing nothing, let me know, please. So that's the New Breath Foundation, and my Director of Operation and Communications, Stephanie G, is with me, and I'm so grateful I have people like her to really support me and hold me accountable, right? We have a very small team. I have only 3 other colleagues. One is a Japanese American woman based in Chicago, Mari, and then also we have Claudia, who is from Oakland, California, who is supporting the New Breath Foundation. Like I say, how much time do we have?
Yeah. We started out with Eddy's slogan of "You must be willing to engage in a personal revolution before we embark on a collective revolution," and I think we've covered that arc really quite. It's it's an amazing life journey, but it's also not just a life journey for Eddy. It's also transformative, I think, for broader society. So I think we're just going to, at this juncture, open up for questions.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Hi, Eddy. Thank you so much for being here. This has really touched me. One thing I wanted to say is CCA, Corporate Corrections of America, which I think rebranded themselves recently to Core Civic, but I believe their business started with immigration facilities back in the 60s and 70s, and that's grown into a multi-billion-dollar business that just keeps profiting off the backs of immigrant communities in this country. But one thing I wanted to ask was, when the women in Atlanta were murdered, it truly upset me how they were treated, and seeing the violence over the past year towards women, Asian American women in the US. I'd love to encourage everyone here at the intersection of film and culture and music that these stereotypes and this fetishization of these groups, whether it's pornography or wherever we're seeing it, I think it's a larger picture. And I would just encourage everyone to look at your work and see what we're all doing and how what we're doing is contributing to what's happening, and how we can change that. And so I've met a lot of millionaires here this week, I think, and so I would say if you are in those industries, just please, consider donating, and thank you, I'll definitely be donating.
Thank you very much. I think that's definitely one thing that we failed to really understand, right? The importance on how do we address those for-profit industries, right? That is really extracting about human resources and for the benefit of themselves, so they can get more money and build their wealth, right? Those wealth are generational wealth that is being exploited, right, through modern-day slave plantations like the prison industry complex, right, with all these for-profit industries. And then I think, the challenge of, many of the gender-based violence challenges is that how do we make sure that whenever we have a space, a platform, we need to uplift those marginalized groups and individuals, right? So, just in Austin, you can definitely look at some of the local organizations that you should be supporting. But then, for some of the people who are leading those type of work, I want to encourage you to look at AAPI Women Lead from Oakland, California, Red Canary Song, who's doing great work to support the people in New York, right? You have Survived and Punished, one of our grantees, who are doing the work that people who don't want to do to support those people who are impacted by those type of violence, right? And so, yeah, definitely, thank you so much for sharing that.
Hi. Kind of a personal story, if I can share just a little bit. So I am Asian American. I am a citizen, and my brother, who's 18 months younger than me, has been in and out of this prison system. We are educated. We are citizens. We were raised by the same parents, but he's had struggles staying out of the prison system. So I would love to hear more about how you were successful in your transition out of the prison system. I know, obviously, the deportation thing is very unfortunate, but out of all the systems, and then to be what I would consider successful today in staying out.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing, your story and just briefly. I think there are one of the challenge as part of this cultural shame and about the fear of losing face, right? So for 14 years of my life, my family didn't tell anyone that I was incarcerated. You know, the mantra was like, oh, Eddy's in school, you know, and as I became older, they say Eddy's in school and working, and Eddy's working across the state. Nobody wanted to talk about the challenges, right? And so we also need to look at people who are impacted in different ways, where your brother may be in and out of the prison, then we have to kind of surround him with the support system that is needed for him to understand that he's not alone, that he has help, right? That he can reach out to people. So one of the, it's not even a best kept secret, right? For me, and why I'm here on the stage right now is because my family never gave up on me, especially my parents, right? No matter how much they felt that I caused shame to them and to the family, they never one day or 1 minute stopped loving me and giving me hope and support, right? And then the other piece is like many of the people who come from the progressive community or people who interact with me, just trying to understand the story itself, right? They were able to embrace me. And it's because of those people that I was able to stay on the right path and feeling inspired and encouraged by them, right? And so I think the things that we need to do is how do we make sure the people who are engaging or experiencing those type of challenges, that they have the support system that they need to be able to heal in their own terms and find their purpose and find their space in their own terms. So it's about never giving up, right? That's why I always express through my salutation, happy new breath, because I want to remind myself and others not to take our breath, our freedom for granted. So please continue to engage your brother and embrace him, and when the right time comes, and that's when things are going to happen.
There's no one else in line. What would you say for people who don't have that family or community support? So I guess just to share, when you go to prison, your car is impounded, you lose your job, you lose your housing if you have an apartment or a home. You don't get to explain to all the people or the places or the companies. You don't get to close your credit cards. You don't get to close your cell phone bill. My brother had to declare bankruptcy while in prison in order to do those things. And he did rely on me to help him. So for people who don't have support, right, when they get out, they literally have nothing. They have no job. They have no place to stay. Sometimes there is housing provided. One time my brother got out of jail and he got a bus ticket to go anywhere in the state of Texas, and that was it. Luckily, he came to my house.
Yeah, I'm sorry that happens to him, and I'm so grateful that you are there for him, right? Just like my sister's always there for me. But I think one of the things about situations like that is that our community has to step up, right? The community-based organization need to step up to provide those type of support to those individuals who just lead that lifeline, right, to start over. And that's why we're talking about second chances, third chances, fourth chances, because people were never given the first chance, right, to be able to succeed and excel. And therefore, we must be able to invest in prevention and then also reentry support for those people who are directly impacted, right? So please continue to be able to just kind of invest again into that personal revolution, to be able to use our own privileges, right, to be able to support other people and uplift other people. Lastly, I want to share, I know we're running out of time here. Lastly, I want to share that, I contributed this anthology right here. It's being put together by Dr. Diane Fugino from UC Santa Barbara and Dr. Robin Rodriguez from UC Davis. They capture the history of activism, right, for the last 50 years. It's a contemporary Asian American activism. It's about how do we build movements, right? And part of building that movement is like, no matter what injustice, no matter what things that's happening in our community, we can all learn from our history. We can all do better. We can all become better human beings if we're willing to invest in humanizing each other, that we invest in love, right? So given that we're still in a pandemic and people are suffering across the country, the war is happening, right, domestically and internationally. How do we make sure that we tell our loved ones and our friends that I love you? How do we show up for them, right, or just listen? How do we take care of ourselves, right? Just be kind and gentle with ourselves, and that's important. And so I want to thank you, Madeline, for help facilitate this conversation. I appreciate you. You're the local here, and so I'm just a visitor, and hopefully I can visit again. If I have another hour, I would love to interact with you individually, like talk about it. But I just want to say again, thank you very much for your presence. Until the next time.